Soaring tuition forces many to choose state schools. They are supposed to be more affordable.
But as you write bigger checks, some are actually getting bigger paychecks. Amanda St. Hilaire investigating starting with a right to know request. Amanda.
Flora, Val, you can see here that request produced a lot of paper. We went through it all, but first I want to clarify. When we say state schools, we're not talking about Penn State or Temple. They get some state money, but they operate independently. So the schools you see here, like Bloomsburg, Westchester, Shippensburg, or IUP, they're part of the state system of higher education, and they're actually owned by the Commonwealth. Those payroll numbers came as a surprise to several families dealing with tuition increases.
So I kept telling my husband from, I think when Justin was little, we need to start putting money away for college. He's applied for.
So Elena and her husband put away what they could for their son's future at Indiana University of Pennsylvania.
Looking back, if we didn't have that much money saved up, our son probably would have had to have come home from college.
To keep her son wearing the IUP crimson,
I think
Elena's gone in the red.
It's still not a fun bill to get.
Especially now. State system records show in 2004, the average cost of attendance at IUP was $10,489. Now it's almost doubled to $20,816.
We're caught. We don't really have a choice. We pay it, and we don't ask questions because it's something that we want our children to have.
Now we're getting answers. Why has the cost of public higher education skyrocketed? Pennsylvania state schools point to funding cuts.
So that makes it increasingly difficult as our costs go up. Our only other source of revenue is really tuition.
With all this talk of funding, we wanted to see how state schools are spending the money they do have. So we went through hundreds of pages of payroll documents over the last 10 years.
We looked at the salaries of non-union employees. So presidents, deans, assistants, information technology staff, just to name a few. In 2004, the total payroll for non-union employees was more than $93 million. In 2014, it was up nearly 42% to $132 million.
Why that kind of increase? Because that's more than inflation.
Overall, if you look at the average salary paid to a non-represented employee 10 years ago to today, that increase actually pretty much tracks inflation.
Economists say the inflation rate has averaged 2.13% per year. But last year, when tuition and fees went up, the president of Bloomsburg got a 10% raise. He now makes more than $248,000 per year. Westchester's president received a 13% raise. He now makes more than $273,000 per year.
That number can be tough for a parent to swallow if they've just written out a check for an increased tuition.
Right. There were two components to those raises.
A merit increase and a market adjustment.
Our university presidents generally are paid below the national average.
Why are those adjustments being made now, especially with a lack of state funding and with enrollment numbers taking a dip?
It was a commitment the board made several years ago. This is a phased-in process, and again, I think the board just believes that it is important, again, to do what we can to make sure that we have the very strongest leadership.
So there's always a balance in any employment situation with trying to get the best employees versus trying to, especially when you're a public entity, doing it something that's affordable.
Auditor General Eugene DePasquale's recent state system audit shows the schools are doing well, but he says they could do more to keep tuition down. So we told him what we found. For example, the assistant to the president of Clarion University got a 50% jump in pay over the last 10 years. She now makes 6 figures. Then there's Bloomsburg, which has a president, an executive assistant to the president, an executive secretary, and a deputy to the president. The Auditor General says there is such a thing as a luxury position.
You got to really take even a second glance at whether it's a critical position on furthering education today. And sometimes there's a situation where you just see that position just isn't necessary anymore.
But there's more. In 2004, 16% of non-union employees made 6 figures. In 2014, 30% made 6 figures.
That's a lot of employees making 6 figures.
Yes, it is, but again, if you look at the average numbers, our average salary has increased at about the rate of inflation.
In the private sector, retiring employees often make up for the ones who get raises.
That's not really happening as often here. So is that something that's sustainable?
I guess on the one hand, I think it shows the system's a good place to work. You know, if you don't have a lot of turnover, that is going to affect your payroll over time.
There is a long-term sustainability issue.
Parents like Alana say it's time for solutions.
There needs to be some type of a cap that's put on the salaries.
But the state system goes back to funding as its biggest challenge, not salaries. Reports show the schools have lower tuition increases than the national average, even with all Pennsylvania's funding cuts.
We would agree completely with the Auditor General when he says we need to do more. We do need to do more. We would also, I think, agree with the Auditor General when he said that the state needs to do more.
But these state universities are there so that everyday Pennsylvanians, that those kids that have the grades, they can go there and not be saddled with lifelong debt. And that is basically being threatened now with the lack of enough state investment.
But on that same note, the Auditor General says if state schools get more funding, they need to hold the line on tuition, and they also need to be transparent. And I will say, Flora and Val, so far they have been transparent with us. This is the fastest response I've ever gotten to a right to know request. We had all these documents the next day.
Wages for men versus women. Is there a gender gap in higher education?
Last night, we told you about big pay raises for some employees at state-owned universities, despite a hike in tuition and a lack of state funding.
Well, now we're learning that male administrators make more than females who are doing the same job. Amanda St. Hilaire is in our newsroom now with the details. Amanda.
Well, Flora, Val, it's no secret that in Pennsylvania and throughout the United States, women make less than men working in similar positions. Now, when we're talking about the state system of higher education, we're talking about payroll as a whole, and it says it's made some big efforts to change that for its own employees.
Walk around Shippensburg, Millersville, or any other state-owned campus, and you'll see plenty of female students. But how well are they represented? We went through hundreds of pages of payroll documents to find out. We focused on the higher paying salaries for employees not represented by unions, so university presidents and deans, for example. Although men and women in those positions are getting comparable raises, there are almost twice as many male deans as female deans.
Higher education historically was a much more male-dominated profession.
The state system says it's trying to change that, but it's not as easy as it looks.
That probably goes back to the fact that people stay around here a long time. So a lot of the positions that were, historically held by males, as they become open, I think you see more and more females in those positions as deans, as vice presidents, as university presidents.
Of the 463 non-union employees making six figures, 52% are men and 48% are women. But while the total payroll for women making six figures is more than $17 million, the total payroll for men making six figures is 98% higher, at more than $34 million.
We have made very significant progress in the area of gender equity over the last decade. We are continuing to do so.
To see if that's true, we went through the documents again. The state system's right. Of the 162 non-union employees making six figures in 2004, 75% were men and 25% were women. The total payroll for women making six figures was more than $5 million, and the total payroll for men making six figures was nearly 189% more at $15 million plus. So the gap's gotten smaller, but there's still more work to do. The state system promises future change.
And I think you'll see those numbers continue to, move closer and closer together.
As for university presidents, it's pretty much equally split between men and women. But interestingly enough, the three highest paid presidents, who are all at the biggest universities, they're all men. So Flora, Val, we have a lot of information in that stack of papers.
All right, Amanda, you talked about hiring more women. What about the employees who are already there? Is the state system doing anything to boost women's pay to bring it back, or what's going to be the difference made?
Well, as I went through the documents, I did notice gradual increases. So, for example, some women are getting slightly higher raises than they used to get 10 years ago. But the state system says it's hard to do more with all the funding cuts from the General Assembly. So it's certainly something we'll be staying on top of.
All right, thank you, Amanda.